There's a new book that has interested Philip and me, appealed to us, by social scientist Adam Grant. Maybe some of you have heard of him, titled Think Again. And it's all about the value of rethinking, about the value of adopting a kind of what he calls mental flexibility. Grant offers evidence-based research, because he is a social scientist, that leads him to conclude that taking on a stance of mental flexibility can begin to counteract what he called calcified ideologies that are tearing American culture apart. He writes, "Our identities are open systems, and so are our lives. We don't have to stay tethered to old images of where we want to go or who we want to be. It takes humility to reconsider our past commitments, doubt to question our present decisions, curiosity to reimagine our future plans. What we can discover along the way can free us from the shackles of our familiar surroundings and our former selves. Rethinking liberates us to do more than update our knowledge and opinions," he says. "It's a tool for leading a more fulfilling life." And Grant, this author here, sounds a bit like meditation teacher Pema Chodron, who talks about this same kind of relaxing our views of things that liberates us from being tied too tightly to the familiar. She calls it, her phrase, is flexibility of being. And she defines this flexibility of being as one that manifests as inquisitive, adaptable, one with the capacity for beginner's mind, which we've heard about when we study mindfulness, one that doesn't have to figure everything out. And she says that if we're too fixed in our identities, too fixed in our beliefs and opinions, we have to busy ourselves, she says, if we're too fixed, with trying to rearrange reality, because reality doesn't always conform to our views. And when I read that sentence, I thought immediately of those who stormed the Capitol as having rearranged their reality in order to be able to do that, to bring themselves to do that. But both the author of Think Again and Pema Chodron are saying kind of the same thing, that how we relate to our thoughts and beliefs and opinions makes a difference in our ability to adapt, to change, and to adjust to a new reality. Holding our ideas lightly allows us to loosen the grip on our personal stories about who we are and what we're capable of doing. Our boundaries become a bit more porous, not dissolved or unprotected, but more open to other possibilities, or using Grant's words, liberates us towards leading a more fulfilling life. His book has caught our attention, really, though, because it's not much of a stretch to recognize some fundamental principles of mindfulness in his notion of rethinking. And it may be, for example, Grant maintains that we should treat our relationship to the ideas we hold as provisional, meaning that even though I may believe this today, I may change this belief if future evidence or facts cause me to question it. Provisional. Similarly, mindfulness asks us to substitute curiosity and openness for certainty, and reminds us that change is a constant and nothing is permanent. Grant also says that it's a sign of wisdom to avoid believing every thought that enters your mind, and urges us instead to become a witness to our thoughts rather than attaching to them. Now, how many times have you heard Mr. Davidson say something like that? And it sounds as if it's come straight from an MBSR manual. So if, as Adam Grant says, rethinking can counteract the calcified ideologies that are tearing us apart, it seems important to become more discerning about our own flexibility of being. The practices of mindfulness and meditation offer us that opportunity for flexibility by bringing awareness to our patterns and our patterns and mental habits, so that we can become more mindful of the thinking process itself. And isn't that what happens kind of when we sit down to meditate? One of the first things we notice is that we have these thoughts that come up again and again, taking us away from our present moment experience. That is a way of beginning to come to some recognition of what our thinking process is, rather than getting caught in the content. And again, we don't try to get rid of thoughts, because they're the source of all invention and creativity and imagination. We need them. But without some awareness of how our thoughts influence us, we're at their mercy. And they don't always lead us in positive, wholesome directions. So meditation and mindfulness not only reveal these thinking processes, but they offer us a way to change our relationship to the thoughts that we have, so that we're not so often carried away, not so often thinking negatively, not so often comfortable with the same old stories. We can observe the process of thinking. We can learn to label our mental habits. Oh, there's planning. Oh, there's worry. We can investigate the relationship between thoughts, emotions, and sensations, finding out what's underneath a belief that gets us stuck. And when we practice these practices, we can enhance perhaps our capability to rethink and regroup and survive pandemics.
So Kay has described in some depth how the combination of the pandemic, the revealing of the depths of racial injustice in this country, and the stark reality of political divisiveness have called for a flexibility of being, a flexibility of mind in each of us, and each in our own unique ways. Let's take a moment and reflect on how each of us has applied rethinking or think again, flexibility of being, to adapt to the pandemic and the other events of the last year. Just pondering for a moment your experience of the last year and selecting one personal experience that has been a challenge, that was initially very much a challenge for you, about what has come up in the last year. And considering the specifics of this challenge for you. When particularly did it happen? When did it arisen? What was going on externally? Who else might have been present in your life? What attitudes, feelings, sensations were evoked? What thoughts were whirling through your mind? So now that we're clear about the challenge, begin thinking about how you have adapted to this challenge, how you have been flexible in your thinking and in your attitudes that help you cope with this challenge, how you've applied flexibility in your own experience. As human beings, we have some very important baseline capacities. One of those capacities is for approaching that which is beneficial in our lives. Eating well, sleep, interacting and loving one another. We also have the capacity to avoid that which is harmful. Disease, people who are abusive, situations that are just too high risk. And we have this third capacity of knowing. We develop this ability to know what we should be approaching and what we should be avoiding. However, unless we are intentional about learning and evolving in our lives, we likely end up defaulting into reactivity and habit. And as a result, these baseline qualities tend to degrade. Approaching easily degrades into craving when we're caught up in reactivity and habit. Avoiding degrades into fear, especially when we're in reactive mode. And conditioning, old experiences come into play. And our knowing degrades into ignorance. We lose ourselves in our grasping, craving, fear, perhaps even hatred. And what we once knew gets pressed down. We end up in a sea of ignorance. And I'm sure we can all think of examples during the past year when our basic capabilities degraded, when we were in reactive mode, when old habits came into play, put us in a place of grasping, fear, ignorance. And alternatively, as human beings, when we are intentional about learning and evolving, then these basic qualities evolve themselves. Approaching evolves into aspiration based upon what's most important to us. Avoiding evolves into understanding the realities that we face in life, the ways that life is fundamentally difficult. We gain an understanding of them instead of getting caught in fear. And knowing evolves into curiosity. The capacity to be open to what's happening, to be interested in it, to investigate it. Aspiration, understanding, curiosity, these are the basic characteristics of flexibility of being able to think again, rethinking, of not getting locked into these calcified thoughts and attitudes. One path toward learning and evolving calls for us to set an intention to learn and evolve, and to find the specific ways we want to spend our attention to support that intention. What are the practices and activities that we might engage in that will help us learn and evolve? And we repeat them enough times so that this experience, which has some newness to it, eventually moves to second nature. We move to this place where learning and evolving are second nature to us. They're the place that we default to. And of course, this is what mindfulness practice is about. And fortunately, the research tells us that if we meditate as few as 5 minutes a day, 5 or 6 days a week, for a few weeks at a time, we begin to change the structure of our brains. We regroove the patterns in our brains toward learning and evolving. When we meditate, what we're really doing is observing what's going on without judgment, staying connected to ourselves, learning about ourselves, learning what's beneficial, learning what's most important to us. Allowing our curiosity to investigate and understand at greater depth. Here's the reflection question for this morning. How has your relationship to uncertainty, which has certainly been a predominant quality of this past year and all of the events, how has your relationship to uncertainty changed over the last year? And what role have mindfulness practices played in helping you change your relationship to uncertainty?